Welcome back to the ongoing director's commentary for Masters of the Universe Classics. I'm your host, Scott ToyGuru Neitlich, the brand manager for 90% of the line plus. Today, we're going to talk about Battle Armor Skeletor. And to do that, it also means looking back at the original version of MOTU, the Fighting Foemen concept. In this concept, He-Man was going to be treated, not He-Man, but the brand, I should say, Masters of the Universe, similar to, well, I guess for lack of a better word, the way Barbie is done, where you could buy a Barbie doll, but you could also buy Barbie doll outfits to give her different looks, different fashions, etc., etc. This was actually very similar to the way Big Jim was done, which was the predecessor action figure line from Mattel in the 70s before Masters of the Universe, where again you could buy Big Jim, and you could also buy outfits to make him into different, sports or different adventures, etc., etc. For MOTU, the original idea was the outfits were going to give He-Man and all of his characters different powers, different abilities, force fields, super strength. Eventually, this idea was dropped and it didn't move forward. But that still led to the idea of, well, how do we refresh main characters like He-Man and Skeletor if we've dropped the idea of new armors giving them their powers, the way, getting people to just buy the armor. And, Skeletor is definitely a character who, throughout the years, has had his fair share of different outfits and different armor. Whether it's the live-action appearances or 2000X, where he got all sorts of kind of mechy armor and details, both regular and deluxe, shall we say, different executions, different price points, bigger armor. Sometimes he'd wear stilts and really stand up tall. And some of these armors were actually made it into the 2000X animated series, the Mike Young show. Some of them, not so much. Some of them were just easy repaints of each other, like the Ice Armor and Fire Armor Skeletor that was the same figure painted in different colors. But hey, why not? These were for kids, and it's awesome. So for all the variants of Skeletor that have ever existed, pretty much the most popular is Battle Armor. And unlike the original concept of selling the armor separately, Martin Areola, a designer for Mattel, who was actually still there when I was there, I got the pleasure of knowing him, came up with the idea of doing a brand new figure, not just selling the armor, with the idea that you would actually buy Skeletor again, which, again, that didn't work with Big Jim. They were selling the outfit separate. Imagine buying the battle armor as a separate thing you would click on. Now, what is a very reoccurring theme throughout Masters of the Universe is that the Big Jim line, which predated MOTU, had a lot of influence, not just on the idea of supplying armor or outfits as a separate purchase, to drive additional sales, but some of the action features that were developed for Big Jim snuck into MOTU, like the idea of rotating heads or giant fists. These were all concepts that were developed in the Big Jim line in the 70s that stuck around and then got sort of reused in MOTU. Now, that's not to say that MOTU didn't have its fair share of original concepts. There were plenty of patents taken out for Masters of the Universe. This example of the patent for the Grayskull throne room that released the trapdoor is a perfect example. This was something Mattel created, patented, and owns, the concept of doing this. So Mattel does create tons of original stuff, but there's no reason you can't reuse great ideas. So Martin, who previous to his work on Masters of the Universe, had worked on the Hot Wheels Crack-Ups line, which was a line of vehicles that when they smashed into each other, triggered a panel on the side of the car, or the front, that would flip around in a circle. And on one side it would be clean, and on the second side it would have a dent. So Martin, being the awesome designer he is, said, hey, let's use this for Masters of the Universe. It would completely work. So taking an idea that was already successful in one line and simply, just like with Big Jim, with rotating faces and characters with metal jaws and giant fists, you could just take this concept of a rotating plate and apply it to an action figure. If it's successful in one line, it can be successful in another. And that's what happened. And why not? Don't just, do one, but let's double down and do our hero and our villain with rotating plates. And this was one of the more fun action features of the vintage line. Being able to touch the plate and having it flip around They actually flipped around 3 different times in the vintage line. For classics, we treated it a little bit differently, especially because, well, we couldn't afford the tooling for action features. That would have been a fully tooled figure. But before we get to that, it's also interesting talking about Battle Armor Skeletor. When I say it was probably the most popular variant, it's not just with collectors and kids, but I mean, he shows up in merchandise and in cross-sells like an inordinate amount of times versus things like some of the later variants in the vintage line that, the Skeletor, the Terror Claws, et cetera, et cetera. This version of Skeletor shows up in artwork on, vintage toys, and not just once or twice, but like over and over again. It almost becomes the de facto Skeletor for the midpoint in the line. The early figures obviously having the original Bone Cross armor from the first release in '82, but once Battle Armor Skeletor was on the scene, he tended to kind of steal the show and would just, show up over and over again. I mean, of course, again, sometimes he's packed in with a figure like this Screech, but yeah, Battle Armor Skeletor was sort of your go-to figure, not just for kids, but for Mattel design as well. They loved him. And it was fun because, again, that tactile sensation of touching the chest armor and seeing a reaction, that's really big. That creates an emotional connection. Anytime you can touch a figure and get a reaction, that's huge. I mean, here he is even showing up in the Battle for Eternia board game. Look at him cheering on those kids, or He-Man's cheering them on. Maybe he's cursing them. Who knows? All right, so transitioning a figure with a very definitive action feature from the vintage line into a classics toy obviously had its hurdles. And we weren't able to do the action feature, as I mentioned, because that would have required tooling a whole new torso with a rotating disc inside or a rotating barrel. The solution that the Four Horsemen came up with was punch-out panels. So the idea is you could push out the panel under the armor and then insert new middle sections that replicated the look of the rotating barrel from the vintage toy. 1 slash, 2 slashes, and then back to normal again. This was simply done by removing the armor and then punching out that middle section. And then you could see he was actually painted purple underneath in case any of the purple skin shone through the the crevices of the armor, so it didn't look like he was blue underneath, if you will. So hey, no detail left unturned. Always hand it to the Horsemen to think of those things. So here again, you can see the armor taken off and reversed, and how that middle armor piece can just pop out. It's a separate piece, and then you could pop in any one of the 3 included midsections with the logo and replace it for the amount of battle damage that you want. And, deliberately packaging him with the double battle damage shown to reinforce the fact that this is Battle Armor Skeletor. Not that anyone's going to mix that up, but I think showing the battle damage in packaging deliberately is a good way of, just visually reminding people which Skeletor you're getting. And kind of taking a cue from that original Fighting Foeman concept of the armor giving characters powers, the battle armor was said in the bio to allow Skeletor to sort of penetrate and walk through the mystic wall. That was also shown in the 2000 X series. He did this to kidnap Baby Adora for Hordak and other nefarious things before he could tear the wall down, which happened in the first episode. All right, so another thing to touch on with Battle Armor Skeletor is while we didn't have the rotating barrel in the chest, we got a lot of slack over that. People just saying it's not Battle Armor Skeletor if it doesn't have a rotating, chest logo. But I mean, Battle Armor Skeletor has been done a lot. And by not just Mattel, by a lot of the licensed companies that have done toys for Masters of the Universe over the years. And, while I haven't kept up on all of the forums for these releases to see what fans think, none of them have had the rotating feature of the original toy. And I don't know if they got the same kind of, slack that we got for classics on the Matty forums. But yeah, fans were not happy that Battle Armor He-Man and Battle Armor Skeletor did not have a rotating action feature, despite really explaining that we can't afford that in classics because of the very small run. A last thing to touch base on Battle Armor Skeletor is his axe. So his big purple axe. The vintage figure did not come with an axe. It came with the half power sword and havoc staff, just like the original release. And I was trying to remember, because I know I was very adamant about adding this axe, like hugely adamant. I'm honestly doing this video trying to remember my rationale, thinking it, maybe it was because in the Filmation series he used a axe a few times, which eventually we were able to tool up that specific axe with the jewel on top. But the axe that we included with Battle Armor Skeletor was He-Man's axe repainted. This is actually more of the Filmation look. So we actually did this axe twice in the line, both a more cartoon look and a regular. But honestly, I think at the end of the day, it's just because I thought axe on axe action. Can I say that? This video is for kids, right? Was really cool, just smashing axes together. And, it just made the figures awesome. And it was a way to give Skeletor something new. And, it was cool. And coolness always wins when it comes to Masters of the Universe Classics. At least does in my boat. Thanks for watching.